Tonight, it's not the headline the executive wanted, but it's the one that stands out a mile.
It's just unsustainable. It's not an acceptable position that the health department would consume absolutely everything 100%.
And as the smallest party with the largest portfolio, we've been pushed into the corner, and that's not acceptable.
Depending on who you listen to, today's budget either prioritised health or was unacceptably severe for our biggest spending department. So what are the consequences? We'll hear from those who've signed up to it and those who've rejected it from inside the executive and outside it. And later we'll assess the political and economic fallout. Hello, the Finance Minister, Caoimhe Archibald, secured support from executive colleagues for a budget that all acknowledged was difficult and challenging. But within minutes, the UUP leader, Doug Beattie, claimed his party had been pushed into a corner. This is a story about numbers, though it is potentially becoming a lot more political tonight, as we'll hear shortly. But first, I'm joined by our economics and business editor, John Campbell. John, this budget was never going to be plain sailing. In terms of the key takeaways for people tonight, what would you be pointing them towards?
So the total cash available to Stormont departments has gone up, and gone up quite significantly by almost 7%, which is virtually unheard of. But that is really distorted or larded by the fact that we had the government money coming into Northern Ireland to get the deal to restore Stormont over the line. And that money is there, but it is only there as a one-off. So it's a bunch of money to be spent this year and next year, and then it's gone. And we know that a lot of that money is going to be consumed in the pay deals which have been agreed since the restoration of devolution. So, for example, the Department of Education, they are seeing their budget rise by 11.5%, a very, very big number. Does that mean your kids' schools suddenly have a lot more money? No, it doesn't. It just means that the money is there to settle the teachers' pay dispute, because remember, that department, they have to settle a pay claim which is multi-year and backdated. And we're really seeing that across all departments who are getting extra money. It's largely about settling pay claims and also dealing with some immediate pressures.
There are, of course, John, two big imponderables still on the table. First of all, where exactly is the conversation between the Executive and the Treasury in London about establishing a proper funding model for Northern Ireland? And then secondly, where is the Executive on the issue of meaningful revenue raising?
Well, we're told that those engagements with the Treasury are due to step up in the not too distant future, because we know that all parties are agreed that they want a new, more generous funding model with the Treasury, which would fund Northern Ireland to an objective level of need. But I think it's quite clear that any outcome from that process is a very, very long way off, maybe after the next general election, before we actually see that bearing any fruit. Part of that process is around revenue raising, because what the party signed up to in terms of the return of Stormont and the financial deal was about 130 million of revenue raising over the next couple of years. A lot of stuff has been ruled out. So, for example, water charges and student fees. It's still not very clear what has been potentially ruled in for raising revenue, but the parties have agreed to do so.
OK. For now, John, thanks very much indeed. Let's hear more from the Finance Minister, Caoimhe Archibald. John spoke to her at her office earlier today, and he began by asking her about the current financial package from Whitehall.
The financial package, I think Treasury would argue, would put us at a level of need for this year and next year. But when the financial package runs out at the end of 25-26, we will fall below need. And that is a position that I think is untenable, given that there is a level of need which has been recognised. Now, Treasury and us may not be in the same position in relation to what that level of need is, and that's an engagement that we want. But the really important bit for me, as I have said, is ensuring that that is baselined into our budget from the start of the next spending review. So that's an engagement that we want to have and to develop those conversations. And another thing that we have been making very clear, both to Treasury and in conversations that we've been having with the Shadow Secretary of State, is the need for us to have multi-year budgets so that our departments have the ability to plan their spend over the next few years, and that helps that more strategic approach to the delivery of public services as well.
You talked about transformation, and clearly transformation of public services is part of this, trying to run services more efficiently and more effectively. Do you have any sense of what the transformation projects which the executive have committed to, what they might be what they might be aiming to do?
So, as you know, there was some money allocated within the financial package towards transformation, and we will be setting up a transformation board to look at the allocation of that fund in coming weeks. And so we will be asking departments to bring forward their proposals in relation to transformation. We also will be developing over the next number of weeks a sustainability plan. So that was an ask as part of the financial package, but it's something we are actually quite keen to do because we want to have that, more long-term strategic look at how we can have greater budget sustainability going forward. And departments will be asked to develop things like workforce plans, technology plans, to outline what their plans will be to deliver and to put our finances on a more sustainable footing going forward.
Revenue raising was also part of the government package. They're expecting the executive to raise an additional 130 million odd over the next 2 years. I think about 40 million of that is accounted for in the recent rates rise. Where are we with the rest of that commitment to raise revenue?
We did get some flexibility from Treasury around the revenue raising ask because they wanted it initially over 12 months. We now have 24 months to deliver that within. But certainly the executive is up for looking at how we can do things more efficiently, what ability we have to generate revenue, what borrowing powers we might want to look at, and if there is potential for the devolution of fiscal powers. So that's all part of that kind of broader conversation about the fiscal framework.
Lots of those revenue raisers, like water charges or university fees, they were immediately ruled out by your party colleagues. You have a consultation on your desk around reforms in the rate system, potentially closing off some of the reliefs. So do you still have an open mind to that, or are you just saying I'm not going to do anything?
So in relation to the rates revenue raising consultation, 1,400 people responded to that consultation. So I certainly want to consider their views. As you will appreciate, I have had a lot on my plate over the past few weeks in relation to the set of them.
But it is still possible that some of those reliefs could be closed off to raise more money.
So I will be looking at those as part of considering the outcome of that consultation. I will be looking at what the feedback was. I've been clear that I think it's really important that our rating system actually aligns with what we're trying to achieve economically. So Conor Murphy, as Economy Minister, has recently set out his economic vision, and I think it's important that when we are trying to achieve it collectively. So I'll be working with the Economy Minister as well in respect of that. And I think it's important as well that we are creating the type of environment that's encouraging businesses to start up and businesses to grow. And then you have more businesses paying into the rating system, which helps us in terms of the delivery of our public services. But certainly I am open to considering what those responses to that consultation were.
The Finance Minister talking to John Campbell earlier, and we'll hear more from John and from our political correspondent Gareth Gordon later. But let's turn to Stormont's 5 main parties, 4 of them in the executive, of course, for now. Anyway, Matthew O'Toole is the official leader of the opposition and the chair of the Finance Committee. Owen Tennyson from the Alliance Party sits on the Finance Committee, as do the DUP's Philip Brett and Sinn Féin's Deirdre Hargey. And we're also joined by the Ulster Unionist Party's representative on the committee, Steve Aiken. So welcome to all of you. Deirdre Hargey, first of all, there is nothing to celebrate tonight, is there? Because even though a budget was voted through by the executive, it clearly wasn't agreed by every minister sitting around the table.
Well, we've been saying for a long time, way before today, Mark, that this was a concerning budget settlement. We knew that it wasn't going to meet the need that was there. The First Minister spoke about this last week, that the bids that were coming in from each of the departments exceeded the money that was available. I do think on the one hand it was good that we did get an executive agreement to agree a budget.
Well, you didn't get everybody around the table to agree. So we've heard all of the positive stuff from Emma Little-Pengelly and from Michelle O'Neill, and we heard there as well the views of the Finance Minister. The reality is that all the ministers sitting around the executive table couldn't sign up to the document.
I think if you let me finish answering, Mark, I would appreciate that. I think on the one hand, it's good that we now have a budget, because I think the departments and communities out there need certainty that ministers can now go ahead and plan.
But they don't have any certainty. They don't have any certainty.
We know that the overall budget settlement is not ideal, and I think what you have from all parties, including the UUP, is that we need to take the fight to the British government.
Right,
because
okay.
I think
but please address my question, which is how big a drawback is it that the Ulster Unionist Health Minister couldn't sign up to?
think what the budget scenario today clearly shows is that we have been underfunded here for far too long. The impact of austerity has had a deepening cut in terms of our
You've
public
made that point,
services
but you're
and
not
our
addressing.
budgets.
I want to talk about
But
something
these are
else.
the
I want to
critical
ask you.
underlying issues
Okay.
as to why we are where
And
we
we've
are
heard that
today,
many
Mark,
times
and
before. We heard it in
they're
the press
important.
conference,
Well,
and
I'm
we've
gonna
heard it
keep
from
saying
Kiva
it
Archibald.
because they
Well, please
are
don't keep
important
saying
issues.
it. No, because I think it's a really important issue that the health minister couldn't sign up to it. I'm asking you how serious and how damaging you think that is.
The health minister took that decision today, but what the Ulster Unionist leader said is that we all need to work collectively together. We need to go and have those direct conversations with the British government. He actually said this publicly today at a press call that he's willing to work with other parties. I know that we're willing to do that to actually ensure that we're funded on the basis of need.
Yeah, but he wasn't prepared to sign up to
services,
he wasn't prepared to sign up
and
to
our
the budget
focus
today.
should remain in that regard.
Okay,
The
right.
budget
Okay,
today
well, we'll
has
move
been
on then.
agreed
Philip
by
Brett,
the
let me ask you. The
executive.
Deputy First Minister, Emma Little-Big-Galley, said ministers are incredibly sympathetic to health, but Robin Swan clearly doesn't think so, and nor does his leader, Doug Beattie, who called it draconian to health. How is it not draconian?
I think it's important to realise, first of all, that ministers across the executive table will be disappointed by the settlements that were reached today. But that is a simple realisation that the pie was just not big enough to go around with all demands. The Health Minister has today received 51% of the entire budget of the executive. He has received an extra £500 million opening today than he had this time.
Which is half of what he said he needs to stand still.
500 million more than he had this year.
Half of what he needs.
500 million more than we wanted. And we're all sympathetic to health, but we also are also sympathetic to all public sector workers and all public services across the piece in Northern Ireland. This is not an ideal scenario. But what we did need to see was strong leadership from the entire executive, and it's disappointing that some have chosen to put politics back into health when they claimed that they were trying to remove politics from health.
Was there ever any chance that Robin Swan was going to get the £800 million that he said he possibly could live with if he couldn't get the billion that he originally asked for?
Well, if we had have listened to the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party during the Hillsborough talks, he said it was a great financial package. So from the Ulster Unionist point of view, clearly there was enough money to go around. There was clearly 3 times more bids that were made by executive ministers, all of which are important to the people of Northern Ireland. The executive prioritised health in this budget, but clearly...
Did it prioritise health in this
as I
budget?
said,
because the health minister doesn't see it that way?
I think any rational person would think that 51% of the entire budget and an additional £500 million is a clear prioritisation.
So Robin Swan is irrational?
What he has done in this is said that he has not got everything that he wants and voted against it. Other ministers have said they haven't got everything that they wanted, but want to work collectively for the betterment of Northern Ireland.
Yeah, but obviously he feels that he's representing the views of people who are stuck on waiting lists, and you will have heard from all of the coverage that there was over the weekend and on this programme last Thursday night that people are actually dying on waiting lists, not from the illnesses that have them on the waiting list, but from the waiting itself. That's how serious the situation is.
I think that many of us and our executive colleagues would have liked to have seen Minister Swan's alternative budget. Minister Swan came forward with no other proposals how this money that he wanted would be found. He has come forward in the 12 weeks that we have been back in action, has not come forward with any plans to how he's going to actually address those waiting lists. So the minister can't have it both ways. He can't say he needs additional money, but then vote against money that he's awarded, but come forward with no alternative plans or no way in which he's going to drive down waiting lists.
So he's been unreasonable, is he?
In my view, he is, yes.
He's been unreasonable. OK, right. Owen Tennyson, can you see why the current health minister is so angry that his allocation has fallen so far below what he says he needs to deliver the services that this society requires?
I can see why he's angry, because I think every minister in the executive is angry at the position that we're in. This is the worst circumstance in which any executive budget has ever been tabled, to be clear. And that is because, as others have said, we have had stop-start government, we have had a period of austerity, and we have had a government at Westminster that has prioritised tax cuts over investment in public services. And that is compounded further by the fact that Northern Ireland has been underfunded below its level of relative need. And I think it would have been a much more powerful statement, actually, were executive parties able to come together with a united voice and put the focus where it matters in terms of getting the deal that we need from the UK government and Treasury. When we talk about health, Mark, I think it's important to nail this point. Public health is about more than the Department of Health. So the Department of Health got 50% of the additional money that was available for allocation. So health was prioritised. Let's be under absolutely no illusions about that.
But yes, but
health was
nowhere
prioritised.
like to the level that the health minister says it needs to be.
Is it credible, Mark, for a minister to bid for 100% of the money that is available to the executive? I don't believe that that is. Because when we talk about health is also about prevention and early intervention.
Well, maybe
it
is reasonable if health is the #1 priority of the executive, which Robin Swan today, and I don't know, maybe you did all see the press conference that he gave. He seemed to me, I don't think I'm over-egging the pudding to say, he was incandescent with rage, and he said if health is the priority of this executive, then it needed to put its money where its mouth is.
And it did. It allocated 50% of the funding that was available.
Which doesn't get away from the fact that it's not enough.
He is channeling his anger in the wrong places.
Okay.
None of the funding available is enough. But I want to finish this point. When we talk about health, issues like early intervention in our education system, issues about the ability of the justice system to deliver outcomes for victims and to protect victims' mental health is as important to the well-being and health of society as people's ability to access appointments. Now, that is important, but we have the highest spend per head in these islands and the worst outcomes. So there is a bigger problem than simply funding. It's also about our ability to transform that health service. We also need to see proposals coming forward from the Health Department in terms of how we change, how we deliver service, because this is about more than money, Mark, and we need to level with people and be honest about that.
OK, let me bring in Steve Aiken at this point from the Ulster Unionist Party. We've just heard Philip Brett say he thinks that the Health Minister, Robin Swan, your colleague, has been unreasonable in not voting for the budget today. Michelle O'Neill said, today is a day for collective leadership. Why has the Ulster Unionist Party's minister thrown his toys out of the pram?
Let's look at it quite clearly. If we were back in Hillsborough, well, we were all sitting around the table, every party that was going to go back into government said health would be their priority. I mean, knew health was going to be a struggle and it was going to be difficult. And you've already heard from some of the other parties, some of the figures have been thrown around there. You're saying that health is getting 51% of the budget, whereas previously at the end of the outturn of last year, we were getting close on 52.9% of the budget. We have taken a cut, a significant cut.
Well, you can't compare what you got at the end of last year with the start of this year.
Mark, let me finish. We are now in a situation where Robin has said very clearly that he needs somewhere in the region of an extra £300 million to be able to have the health service function. Tonight, we had the BMA coming out saying very clearly that this situation is untenable. What should be happening right now, tonight? All the ministers should be locked away in a room with the permanent secretaries and looking at options to be able to close that gap. We mightn't be able to close the £300 million gap, but we should be doing that.
Well, if we've done that and we've got the budget published today, are you suggesting that money should be taken away from promises made today and given to health? Even though, as Philip Brett and others have said, today health was given 51% of the budget, an increase of 6.3% on last year's allocation, £500 million extra, when all the other departments in the executive are struggling as well.
Mark, it depends when you start where the baseline was. If you actually take to the baseline where it was at the end of the health budget, we've actually taken.
Yeah, I'm taking the baseline at the start, the allocation at the start of the year. You're not comparing like with like. You are not comparing like with like. Take the allocation at the start of last year and compare it to the allocation at the start of this year. And there's an increase of 6.3%.
There isn't an increase of 6.3%. Why will people not listen to what the actual figures the Department of Finance have actually put out, where the baseline figures were at the end of this financial year?
Well, the other people here are shaking their heads. I'm sorry, you're not comparing like with like.
Which is a 2.3% cut.
Yeah. Okay, and that is another way of looking at it, and it is clearly not the way that the Department of Finance...
It is not another way of looking at it, Mark.
Sorry, Steve Aiken.
We cannot deliver our health service with a 2.3% cut.
Okay,
all the parties that went
just
into
for
the
the benefit, Steve Aiken, of people who are watching this and don't understand, please let me finish, who don't understand the figures that have been bandied about. The Department of Finance is clear that the figure that was allocated today is a 6.3% increase on the figure that was allocated in the budget last year. Now, there were other monies made available to health throughout the year, and you're adding those on and comparing that to this. It could be that other monies will be added on in the course of the next 12 months. And then you would compare that figure to the end of last year. You have to compare like with like.
Excuse me, Mark, just let me finish, please. That's like saying that your pay rise If you wanted to get a pay rise next year, we would base it on what you got the year before, not what you have
Okay,
now.
well, look, the reality is we are where we are. There's £500
point to
million
make.
additionally being put in, the Department of Finance says, on where we were this time last year. It is not as much as the Minister wants. The question is, what does the Minister do now? Because he's not signed up to the budget. If he thinks it's so unfair, if, as your party leader says, the smallest party with the biggest spending department has been pushed into the corner and ignored, why is Robin Swan still in the executive tonight?
Because what we want to do is what should be happening right now is every minister and every permanent secretary should be locked away in a room, and they should be looking at how they can close that gap.
You've already said that.
That's what they would do in every other part of the United Kingdom.
Answer the question
They're
I've
not
asked
doing
you
it
now.
Today, so why not?
Why is he
Answer me
still
that
in the
question,
executive?
Mark.
Why is he
aren't
still in
doing
the
it?
executive tonight?
Because we are asking that question. Doug has asked the question to talk to the party leaders to get this going and get this moving. This is what should be happening. Rather than point scoring from the DUP and Sinn Féin against us, what we should be doing, because this is about the health of the people of Northern Ireland.
Okay, is it possible, here's a simple question, is it possible for Robin Swan to vote against the budget and stay in the executive? Or does he now need to consider whether a line has been crossed and the Ulster Unionist Party should be pulling its minister out of the executive? Is that something you are discussing within the party?
Mark, did you just not hear what I said? What we should be doing is all the ministers should be sitting down together in a locked room with the permanent secretaries to try and get to this point.
Sure, I understand. That's the third time you've said it. Try answering my question, which is...
Why don't we do it then? Why don't we do it, Mark? Why don't all the parties get together and do it? Because what we're supposed to be doing is working collectively. If we go back to Hillsborough
Well, I think that's part of the process, maybe before the budget.
That health was the priority.
Okay, your party leader has now called for the other party leaders to sit down and talk to him about what needs to happen next. I'm simply asking you, is there a conversation going on within the Ulster Unionist Party as to whether or not the wise strategic policy is to stay in the executive, or whether it might be more sensible, if you're so opposed to this budget, to leave and to oppose this budget and this executive from the opposition benches?
Mark, we've said what we want to do. We want to get all the ministers together. We want to get the permanent secretaries together, because this is what should happen in a normal democracy when we're talking about these things. This should be talking about normal government. Listen to what the BMA are saying. Listen to what everybody's saying out there from the sort of the health professionals and the rest of it. We cannot have a sustainable health service with a 2.3% cut, and we're £300 million short of where we need to be. We can't
is Robin Swan going to be the health minister this time next week?
There's no point pretending we can.
Okay, you've made that point repeatedly, time and again. I think people will have heard you say it now. Is Robin Swan going to be the health minister this time next week?
I have no doubt Robin will be the health minister next week. But do you know what I want to see? I want to see all those ministers together with the permanent secretaries.
Okay, listen, 5 times is more than enough. I think we've got the message as far as that's concerned.
Well, maybe somebody will listen to us then.
Okay, Okay, you've made your point. I think everybody has heard it very, very clearly. Thank you. Let me move on to Matthew O'Toole. From an opposition point of view, are you at all sympathetic to the stance the Ulster Unionist Party is taking tonight?
Well, it's important to say first off that I acknowledge and I'm sympathetic with the fact that the executive is in a constrained fiscal position, and we, as an opposition, have never disputed that. As Owen said, actually, the pressures of inflation, austerity, have imposed significant constraints on the executive. We acknowledge that, and we agree that they should have a better funding package from the UK government. All that being said, I am not impressed. The opposition is not. We don't think this budget statement released today offers anything like the clarity or prioritisation that the public, I think, were led to believe they would see, and rightly should expect.
In what tangible way? I mean, what are you not saying that you think you should have seen?
Okay, well, this is a 5-page document, Mark, with some tables at the end. It sets out a list of allocations, but it doesn't offer any clear plan for how the executive wants to, even in the context of constrained finances, get to rescuing public services and what its clear priorities are. There are a list of tables which give allocations, some of which I acknowledge come from a context of constrained finances. But the blunt truth is these parties, the executive parties, have passed motion after motion on everything from, hang on a second, childcare
But they'll now
to
make their own
lockdown.
allocations, that's the point. So these are the headline allocations that have been divvied up by the Department of Finance, and then individual ministers will make their specific allocations, and then we'll get a bit more detail. That's how it works.
But it would be good to see a programme for government too, Mark. What we were promised is...
We're all waiting for that.
What we were promised from an executive is some form of joined-up collaborative government where we would see a set of priorities agreed with budgets attached. What we've seen today is a flimsy document which does not have a clear sense of prioritisation or direction. I acknowledge the constrained financial position, but I'm afraid this document comes nowhere close to giving a sense of leadership and direction. I'm not being unreasonable by asking for these things. I think it's also worth saying that the big choices that the executive say they're going to make aren't even touched upon. The Finance Minister talked about revenue raising. That's not even hinted at in this document.
But briefly, if you would...
And by the way, both Sinn Féin and the DUP have made specific promises.
And I want to come back to... I'll come back to you just in a second.
Executive parties have made a whole list of promises.
Right, just briefly, if you would, because we've got to get through quite a bit of ground here. Is Robin Swan being reasonable or unreasonable in adopting the stance that he's adopting? And can he stay as Health Minister in an executive whose budget he has voted against?
Well, what I would say is it is fair enough for any minister to take a robust position in advance of a budget being produced and have robust conversations and to stand their ground when it comes to their department. That's what you would expect. I don't think it's a great look for any government to have ministers voicing kind of cacophonous sentiments, but I completely understand why he is frustrated. I think it is important that we see prioritisation. It's also worth saying that if you look at the motions that have gone down from executive parties, and by the way, Mark, we've seen more than £1.5 billion worth of promises made by executive parties in motions. A lot of that.
The SDLP has put quite a few motions in front of the Assembly too, which were quite expensive.
We're not in government.
Yeah.
We're not in government.
Well,
so
and
we
you've
don't have the
supported
power to
some of
implement them.
the motions that have been put forward by the
we've supported
government
motions.
parties. Well, that would have cost money.
Expecting that the executive parties would at least give some indication when they produced a budget statement of how they were going to introduce them, pay for them, or even phase them. I think people didn't expect the world on a stick in day one. They didn't expect miracles, but they did expect a plan, and I'm afraid today we haven't got it.
OK, let's come back to Deirdre Hargey. Let me ask you, what about Steve Aiken's suggestion there? And he made it several times during our conversation, that what needs to happen now, according to the Ulster Unionist Party, is for executive ministers and senior civil servants to sit down and discuss closing the gap for health, because health is supposed to be the number one priority of this executive. Can that happen?
Well, health is the priority, Mark, as was stated, in terms of the budget that health has got over 50%. The available spend that was available in today's budget, again, they've got over 50%. From 2020, health has received an additional £2 billion. And I do think it is a fair point to ask how that money is being used and the outcomes that we're getting. Now, as was said, it's not an ideal budget for any department. All departments are facing these challenges. Michelle O'Neill has spoken to Doug Beattie after today, because I think he threw a line out that they're willing to work with other parties to look at the budget settlement overall. And I think that's where we do have to have collective ownership and action in looking at these issues in the round. Because it is right, today's budget and what was given isn't the complete picture. And that's not what it's supposed to be. That's not what the budget process is about. There is a programme for government process, and we are hoping that programme for government can come very shortly, because we want to go out and consult on that as soon as possible. How shortly? The Finance Minister has also started negotiations around the fiscal framework, and those discussions are ongoing. That looks at multi-annual funding, which actually allows you to do transformation. That includes discussions around transformation, but to look at upfront investments that allow us to do that. And it also looks at our funding on the basis of need. All of these things need to be taken in the round. The budget process is one part of that.
All right. Philip Brett, the DUP controls the second biggest spending ministry in education, of course. This evening, trade unions are pretty furious, and they're talking about further industrial action. Low-paid education workers are being told, they say, by the Education Minister that there is no money to fund a pay rise for them. First of all, is that right?
So within the budget that has been agreed, there has been no funding that has been secured at this stage to pay our vital non-teaching support staff.
And the Minister said not very long ago, a matter of a few weeks ago, he was working very hard to deliver on that very thing.
And if you had just let me finish that point, Mark, you will read in the document that was published by the Finance Minister today that she and the Education Minister will be in discussions with Treasury very shortly in terms of how we draw down that funding to ensure that those vital workers right across the EA and other support sectors are...
No guarantee that the Treasury is going to make the money available.
There's a clear will from all executive parties and, in fairness, the opposition to ensure that we deliver for our support workers.
Yeah.
And I'm confident
But
that
that's not the same as saying the Treasury will give you the money.
No, but I'm confident that the collective will of the Assembly and Executive is how we should be approaching these things, is all working together, not one party out on a limb trying to politic over an issue, that we will deliver on this, because there is a clear commitment from all parties around the Executive table and in the Assembly to ensure that those EA staff get the funding that they deserve.
OK, Owen Tennyson, I think it was your party leader, Naomi Long, who said we're getting to the point where people are going to have to start throwing pieces off the board and serious cuts are going to have to be actually addressed as far as executive ministers are concerned. That's the situation we're in now, and that means that the Justice Minister, your party leader, is going to have to do that as well, and that's going to be extremely painful.
It's going to be extremely difficult, Mark, but we're clear that the only way forward is to have that engagement with Treasury. And, I mean, ministers were faced with a choice between bad and awful. The bad choice was agreeing the budget. The awful choice would have been agreeing no budget and leaving public services in complete and utter limbo, with Treasury actually refusing to negotiate with us because we couldn't even agree a budget on paper. I think today is an important step, a difficult one, but an important step towards getting the funding package which we all so desire and agree is needed.
OK, all right, we're out of time, folks. I wish we had more time because there's an awful lot we could be talking about. But thank you all very much indeed for coming in to join us tonight. Let's get some analysis of what we've been talking about. John Campbell is still here. He's been joined by our political correspondent, Gareth Gordon, and they've been listening intently to the conversation I've been having at the main table. Gareth Gordon, I don't know, I'm not quite sure where we start. Maybe we should start with what Steve Egan had to say as far as the Ulster Unionist Party is concerned. Others around the table described him as being unreasonable because he's got 51% of the budget. Steve Egan clearly doesn't see the numbers that way, and he wants to see a negotiation to close that gap. How does that work?
Well, I thought that's what had been happening for months on the run-up to this budget, with ministers and permanent secretaries, etc., locked in a room. And the result of that is the budget. And the budget's what we've got. And I may be wrong, but I do not think that budget's going to be renegotiated.
And whenever I was speaking to Robin Swan at the weekend, he said very clearly, I need £1 billion to stand still. He subsequently said he thought he could manage, wouldn't be ideal, but he could manage with 800 million. I mean, are we assuming that when he was told, what, today, that he was getting 500 million, that was a great shock?
Well, I would have thought he had a pretty good idea of what was coming, but he didn't vote for the budget knowing the budget would still pass. I mean, in the past, the SDLP have done something similar. Had the DUP not voted for the budget, that'd be a different thing, or Sinn Féin not voted for the budget. So he did that knowing the budget would pass. He feels that party politics, as they always are at play here. I asked Robin Swan, did he think that if a DUP minister was in health or a Sinn Féin minister was in health, and let's face it, neither of those parties wanted the job, there would have been a bigger allocation, and he said absolutely. So he obviously thinks party politics is going on. But let's be clear, all parties, the Ulster Unionist Party are no different, will do what is right ultimately for that party. We know that the Ulster Unionist Party was split about going into an executive in a highly democratic and unusual move. The leader, Doug Beattie, didn't want to go in, but he was outvoted. I haven't heard any likelihood that that's going to change. There was rumours sweeping Stormont early this afternoon when we knew there was going to be a press conference involving Doug Beattie and Robin Swan that the party was going to walk. I didn't think they would, and I don't think, listening to Steve Egan tonight, that it's any more likely than it was yesterday, but we will have to see.
Well, he did say there he firmly believes that Robin Swan will be the health minister this time next week. We do know that there is an Assembly Party group meeting tomorrow, but I think that's a regular Friday meeting. That hasn't been characterised as anything else, has it? And then there's the AGM of the Ulster Unionist Party at the weekend. I mean, could they change? Could the hue of those meetings change?
Things always can change. I was speaking to a senior member of the party tonight. He said he didn't think there was any imminent likelihood of them walking out. Who knows? That meeting tomorrow is the regular Friday Zoom meeting with the MLAs. The AGM in Tyrone on Saturday is just that. It's an annual general meeting. There's obviously a lot of time there to reflect. I'm sure this will come up. But the UUP, let's be honest, have been a bit all over the place since Stormont came back. I mean, on the day Stormont came back, We had Andy Allen, the East Belfast MLA, tweeting his disapproval of Robin Swan taking the health job, saying, "We need a health minister with their full focus on the task in hand, not one eye on Westminster." The Deputy Leader, Robbie Butler, thought he had an agreement with the DUP that he would get the education job, and he was considering his options then. Then we have the Tim Collins situation and the interview with Doug Beattie and Talkback this week. You would almost think that the UUP are intent on taking the focus off the DUP in their time of trouble. Parties serious about electoral success do not wash their dirty linen in public like this.
OK, well, that's a very interesting point. I want to pick up on some of those numbers with you because Steve Aiken was absolutely determined that he does not accept the figure of a 6.3% rise in the Department of Health budget. I was simply making the point that others might say you have to compare like with like. So if you're going to talk about what you ended up with at the end of last year, you can't compare that with what you're starting with in this new financial year. What do you make of 6.3% increase versus a 2-point-something% cut?
Well, they're both correct, of course, but it depends the comparison that you want to make. I suppose the issue is that in terms of what Robin Swan's outturn or total budget allocation might be this year, yes, we will have the regular monitoring rounds where executive funds are shuffled around, but it's unlikely we'll see as much in-year funding coming to health this year because we're not going to get a repeat of the deal which restored Stormont.
And you know how budgets work. Gareth made the point at the beginning. He thought that the process of negotiation was running up to today, and today, was the final settled set of numbers. And Steve Aiken again is saying what we need to see now, according to his party leader, he says, is the party leaders sitting down with senior civil servants and other ministers and talking about how we can close this gap. The figures are the figures, and the others around that table representing the other parties didn't seem terribly sympathetic to the position that Robin Swan finds himself in tonight. Is that fair to say?
That sort of renegotiation won't happen. What will happen now is that the ministers working with their senior officials are going to have to work out what this means for all the programmes within their departments. So in the coming weeks and months, what we will get are the Stormont committees where the ministers and senior officials will appear and they will start to explain what this budget actually means programme by programme within their department. OK,
but there's absolutely no chance of the ministers all sitting down around the table and Robin Swan saying, listen, I really do need that 300 million. Are you prepared to give up that? And are you prepared to give up that and give it to me? That just simply isn't going to happen. No. The Ulster Unions must know that's not going to happen. A version of that will only happen in the monitoring rounds. So the monitoring rounds are the regular exercises where if one department is underspent for one reason or another, then those funds can be moved to another department which needs it. So it will happen in that respect. But the idea that there's going to be a wholesale renegotiation of the budget is not happening. And just in case anybody hasn't fully understood this and the message hasn't landed, what we are about to see now, presumably, is real cuts. Cuts that are going to make a difference to services that are provided by government. What we have tended to see is not like big bang ending of individual services. It's just been this slow and steady deterioration. Police counters are going to be closed down in certain police stations. There's a leisure centre which is closed for lack of staff. Is it going to reopen? Your kids' school are asking for more money again because they're in deficit. Just all these things where it just seems to get a little bit worse month by month, but not in a way that you suddenly notice. And that's I think probably what we're going to continue seeing. This just rationing, slow drip effect. OK, we've about 20-25 seconds left, Gareth. How much of what's happening and people squaring up to each other and not being very pleased with each other, as was demonstrated tonight, is about the forthcoming general election?
I think quite a bit of it. Robin Swan himself is resigning to fight South Antrim. That's a seat that the UUP think they can win. It's a seat that the UUP probably need to win. As I said to you earlier, I think political parties normally do what they think is best for them, and perhaps that is where we are. OK, we'll leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed. We'll see how the story unfolds over the coming days. We'll have the latest on Sunday politics at the weekend, as usual, at 10 o'clock here on BBC One. Do join me for that. For now, from all of us, good night.